just say?
He said there's a storm coming in.
I know.
Did you know Linda Hamilton has an identical twin sister? And in one of the Terminator sequels, she actually appeared on screen alongside Linda without most audiences even realising it. But behind the scenes, Linda's real-life story is even more dramatic than her most famous roles. She rose from small-town roots to become one of the most iconic action heroines of all time, then suddenly disappeared. She battled bipolar disorder, walked away from Hollywood, and endured a tumultuous marriage to Titanic director James Cameron, only to make a surprising comeback decades later. So, what happened to Linda Hamilton? Let's fade to black. Linda Hamilton was born on September 26, 1956 in Salisbury, Maryland, a quiet town on the Eastern Shore. She had a twin sister named Leslie, and the two were inseparable growing up. Their father, a physician, died suddenly in a car crash when they were just 5 years old. It left a lasting impact and a kind of early emotional fracture that Linda would later say shaped her entire outlook on life. Raised by a strict, no-nonsense mother, Linda described her childhood as stifling. She once called it intellectually barren, and said she found escape through reading, often finishing multiple novels a week. Films and TV weren't a big part of her upbringing. In fact, she didn't even dream of being an actress. She originally enrolled at Washington College in Maryland, studying for a career in the arts, not the performing kind, but it was there that a drama professor noticed something in her and pushed her to audition for stage productions. That spark led her to New York City, where she began formal training at the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute. There, she immersed herself in method acting, honing a style that leaned heavily on internal conflict and emotional rawness, traits that would come to define so many of her characters. She wasn't polished, and she definitely wasn't glamorous, but she had something far more compelling: intensity. You believe her. Linda's screen career started quietly. Her first on-camera appearance came in 1979's Night Flowers, an obscure independent drama that was barely released. She followed that with guest spots on a few TV shows in the early 80s, including Shirley and Hill Street Blues. They were small parts, but she made the most of them, playing against type. One of her earliest dramatic credits came in the 1980 TV film Reunion, where she played a young woman reconnecting with former classmates in the wake of a tragic loss. It was one of the first glimpses of her ability to carry emotional material. In 1982, she landed her first starring role in Tag, The Assassination Game, a pulpy college thriller that's mostly forgotten now, but it marked a turning point. It wasn't the film that stood out, it was her. There was something quietly interesting about her presence, a kind of tension under the surface that made you watch her more closely than the dialogue probably deserved. But it was 1984 that would change everything. She was cast as Sarah Connor in The Terminator, a dark sci-fi action film from a young director named James Cameron. At the time, nobody expected it to be more than a quirky B-movie, but the film hit like a freight train, and Hamilton's performance as Sarah became the emotional engine behind its success. What made her portrayal unforgettable was that she didn't play Sarah as a traditional damsel or even a hero in waiting. She played her as a real woman, terrified, confused, but stubbornly defiant. As the film progresses, that fear hardens into purpose, and by the end, Sarah Connor had become something iconic, a figure of survival and transformation, and so had Linda Hamilton. After the Terminator's surprise success, Linda Hamilton found herself in demand, but not necessarily with the roles she was hoping for. Hollywood had a tendency to box in women, especially those who made a name in genre films, and for a time, she was offered a lot of damsels, scream queens, and passive love interests. Her first major role post-Terminator was in the 1984 adaptation of Stephen King's Children of the Corn. The film has definitely since gained a following, but at the time it was another dark and violent story, one where Linda again played a woman thrust into danger by forces beyond her control. While not a massive critical hit, it added to her growing resume in horror and genre storytelling, and for many fans, it remains an underrated piece of her early career. 2 years later, in 1986, she took a swing at something more ambitious: King Kong Lives, a big-budget sequel to the 1976 remake. She played Dr. Amy Franklin, a heart surgeon tasked with saving the giant ape's life via open heart surgery. The concept was wild, The film was savaged by critics, and Linda herself would later joke about how ridiculous it was, but even in a movie that big and absurd, she played it straight, anchoring the chaos with a performance that never felt like it was in on the joke. She was also exploring a wide range of genres. In Black Moon Rising in 1986, a sleek techno-thriller written by John Carpenter, she starred opposite Tommy Lee Jones as a mechanic caught up in a high-tech heist. The film wasn't a hit, but it showed she could handle action and tension without relying on sci-fi tropes. Throughout this period, she kept jumping genres, sometimes crime thrillers, sometimes romantic dramas, sometimes horror. It wasn't about chasing prestige, it was about working and learning and figuring out where she fit in the industry. But it was her turn to television that truly gave her a new identity. In 1987, Linda Hamilton took on the role of Catherine Chandler in Beauty and the Beast opposite Ron Perlman. The show was a mix of romance, fantasy, and gritty crime drama, an unusual blend for network television, and it struck a chord with audiences. Catherine was a New York DA with a tragic past drawn into a secret world beneath the city streets. It ran for 3 seasons and earned her a Golden Globe nomination. More importantly, it proved she could do more than run from killer robots or scream her way through horror movies. By the end of the 80s, Linda Hamilton had evolved from a breakout sci-fi star into something more versatile and more unpredictable. She was without doubt not on the typical leading lady arc, but she was doing things her own way. By the early 90s, Linda Hamilton was already known as Sarah Connor, but she hadn't yet become the version of Sarah that would go down in pop culture history. That all changed with Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Released in 1991, T2 wasn't just a sequel, it was a total reinvention. James Cameron was back in the director's chair, and this time, Sarah Connor wasn't a victim. She was a soldier, hardened, paranoid, and emotionally scarred, and to pull that off, Linda Hamilton underwent one of the most intense physical and psychological transformations any actress had ever taken on for a role. She trained for months with ex-commandos, she lived on a brutal no-carb diet, she learned weapons handling and military drills, and by the time filming started, she had transformed her body and her mindset into something capable of taking on a cyborg in combat. The result was staggering. Her portrayal of Sarah in T2 redefined what a female action hero could look like. Definitely not glamorous, not quippy, not there to support the male lead. She was the story. A mother-turned-warrior determined to protect her son at any cost, even if it meant losing her own humanity along the way. Critics raved, audiences were stunned, and Linda Hamilton's performance became the emotional and philosophical backbone of the entire film. But off-camera, things weren't quite as triumphant. During filming, Linda began a romantic relationship with James Cameron. It was intense and often volatile, 2 strong, obsessive personalities colliding. At the time, Cameron was still married to director Kathryn Bigelow. The affair became one of the most talked about behind-the-scenes scandals in Hollywood, and it marked the beginning of a personal chapter that would later spiral into heartbreak and disillusionment. Still, in terms of pure screen impact, this was peak Linda Hamilton. T2 became the highest-grossing film of 1991 and cemented Sarah Connor as one of the most iconic characters in genre film, right alongside Ripley, Max Rokitansky, and The Bride. And for Linda, it was the performance of a lifetime. After Terminator 2, Linda Hamilton was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Magazines called her Hollywood's toughest woman. She'd become a symbol of empowerment, strength, and self-reliance, but behind the image, she was falling apart. The physical and mental demands of T2 had taken a toll. Linda later admitted she was dealing with severe depression throughout production, and for years after. What she didn't know at the time was that she was living with bipolar disorder, something that would go undiagnosed until much later in her life. In interviews, she described her moods as wildly unpredictable and said the smallest triggers could send her into weeks of isolation or exhaustion. It made fame a difficult thing to live with. In 1997, she married James Cameron after several years of an on-again, off-again relationship that had begun during T2. Professionally, Cameron was on top of the world. He'd just directed Titanic, but their marriage quickly crumbled under the weight of conflicting personalities. Linda later said, "We were terrible together. He loved the ocean, I loved the land. We were oil and water." They divorced in 1999, with Linda reportedly receiving a $50 million settlement, one of the largest in Hollywood history at the time. During this period, she continued to act, often in more low-key or experimental projects. She starred in the underseen psychological thriller Separate Lives in 1995, playing dual roles as a psychiatrist and her dangerously unstable twin, a performance that played with identity and duality in a very personal way. Toward the end of the 90s, she moved into voice work, lending her voice to Disney's Hercules, the animated series, which allowed her to stay active in the industry without the pressure of major on-camera roles. She kept acting during this period, but deliberately chose smaller, less visible roles like Silent Fall in '94, the disaster movie Dante's Peak in '97, and a handful of made-for-TV dramas. In Dante's Peak, opposite Pierce Brosnan, she played Rachel Wando, a small-town mayor trying to protect her children from a volcanic eruption, another of her quietly iconic roles. But by the late 90s, Linda Hamilton had simply had enough. The fame, the tabloids, the chaos, it all became too much. After her marriage ended, she withdrew almost completely from Hollywood. She later said she needed to rediscover who she was outside of the industry and outside of Sarah Connor. For years, she turned down offers, lived a quieter life, and focused on her mental health. She sought therapy, committed to treatment, and eventually found balance. She once said, "It wasn't acting that broke me, it was everything around it." By the early 2000s, Linda Hamilton had stepped almost entirely out of the spotlight. She wasn't turning up at premieres. In fact, she seemed to be actively avoiding the Hollywood machine altogether. But quietly in the background, she began making her way back. One of her earliest returns came not through film, but through voice acting. It was a small gig, but a telling one, even if she wasn't ready to return to the screen just yet. Over the next few years, she popped up sporadically in television, including a memorable guest spot on Frasier in 2004 as Dr. Linda Royce, and a recurring role in the NBC series Chuck between 2010 and 2012. She also worked on a number of smaller indie films and genre TV movies, none of them blockbusters, but each one giving her the chance to work without the pressure of carrying a franchise. Linda later said that during this period she chose projects based on whether they seemed enjoyable, not career-defining. For once, she was just acting for the sake of it. But behind the scenes, fans and producers were always asking the same question: would she ever come back to Sarah Connor? That answer finally came in 2019 when she returned in Terminator Dark Fate, nearly 3 decades after T2. The film brought Linda back not as a side character, but as a hardened, older Sarah Connor, bitter, grieving, and still hunting machines. The version of Sarah in Dark Fate was raw, weathered, and deeply human, a woman who had lived through hell and kept going anyway. Linda said she only agreed to return because she felt there was something new to say about the character, that she wasn't interested in repeating Sarah, but in revisiting her through the lens of time, trauma, and age. While the film underperformed at the box office, critics singled her out for praise. The Hollywood Reporter called her performance a masterclass in lived-in rage. For many fans, though, seeing her back, grey hair, weathered skin, full of fire, was more satisfying than any visual effects spectacle. It wasn't about reclaiming stardom, it was about closure. Today, Linda Hamilton lives quietly in New Orleans, far removed from the Hollywood spotlight she once dominated. She's been refreshingly honest about how little she misses the industry, saying she never craved fame, and now in her late 60s, she finally feels comfortable just living life on her own terms. She's not currently married, and hasn't remarried since her brief but highly publicised marriage to director James Cameron ended in 1999. Before Cameron, she was married to actor Bruce Abbott, with whom she had her first son, Dalton, born in 1989. Linda has also raised a second child, though she's chosen to keep most details of her private life out of the spotlight. She stepped away not out of failure or rejection, but out of self-preservation. For years she battled bipolar disorder privately, long before mental health was something actors spoke openly about. She's since said that it coloured every part of her career, the highs, the self-doubt, the exhaustion, and that finding peace meant learning to live outside the spotlight. In 2020, she suffered the heartbreaking loss of her twin sister, Leslie, who had once appeared alongside her in Terminator 2. They were incredibly close, and Linda has spoken about the deep bond they shared, a connection that ran far deeper than just genetics or screen appearances. Losing her only sibling reinforced what she already knew, that life outside of fame is where the real healing happens. For someone who already valued solitude and privacy, that kind of loss only deepened her retreat from public life, and really, who could blame her? She hasn't tried to stay relevant. She's chosen a quieter version of success, one where the work speaks for itself and the rest can fall away. And honestly, that might be the strongest thing she ever did. Thanks for watching this retrospective on Linda Hamilton. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the actors and films that shaped our screens. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can now buy me a coffee at the link below. Every bit goes towards helping me keep these stories going. Thanks again for being here, and I really do look forward to seeing you all in the next one.